Do you struggle in your drawing with excessively bold and stiff lines? This is something I see quite often in beginners. They're not happy with how obvious their mistakes are. They're not happy that all their lines feel bold. They feel the same, whether it's a lovely church, whether it's a big tree or a wall in the foreground. Everything comes with this bold line. But what if I told you it was really simple to move beyond stiff lines and into character? The ideas in this video allow me to create this in a couple of minutes, create different versions of the same scene and just explore my world in a really enjoyable, fun, relaxed and loose way. So the reason, in my experience, that these kind of stiff lines develop, well, a handful of things can happen. Firstly, it can come down to something as simple as our grip. We're gripping our pen instead of like a sketcher, nice and loose. We'd grip it like we're writing. So if we're writing, we hold it nice and controlled so we can write, here we go, house. If we hold our pen a bit further back, it's very hard to write neatly. I have to put an awful lot of thought into it. But that same phenomenon, holding our pen further back, allows us to suddenly create these looser lines. And you can try that for yourself. Just try doing a little loose line, holding it like a writer, then just try doing a loose, slightly wobbly line, holding it a bit further back. And suddenly you'll find this variety can come, which you can't achieve with this same writer's grip. If I press hard, it's still pretty similar line. If I press hard with a loose grip, we get an enormous amount of variety. So suddenly something that simple can help us change. But there's more than that. The other thing is a bit of a psychological challenge. We're worried that our marks are going to be wrong. So we draw slowly, and that adds a certainty and a pressure, and our grip suddenly tightens up, and then our house becomes really bold. And you know what happens then? Any mistake we do make is really obvious. And let's say we do make a bit of mistake, we see it, and then we correct it, and we correct it again until it looks like it's the right thing. We've overcorrected and our lines have got really bold. And that has a couple of other problems. It means when we start hatching or adding textures, things get really busy really quickly, because what's the difference between this line, which is supposed to be the edge of a building, and this line, which is supposed to be some gentle hatching to add a bit of value? It means you can't tell the difference between objects, trees and buildings, trees and walls, grass in the foreground. And all you need to do is allow yourself a bit of freedom. Allow that line, instead of sending it on a strict path, allow it to go for a wander, go for a little walk. It can go down, it can go up, it can dot around, it can become big and thick for a bit. It can swirl. And suddenly, texture can develop. All sorts of interest can develop if you just allow that line to wander and wobble a little bit. So if we take our church again, instead of applying a bold, thick writer's grip, I'm going to loosen up, hold my pen further back. That makes it harder to control, easier to make mistakes, but easier to wobble around. Remember, that wobble is also actually more real than a very strict line. None of the lines that we draw really exist in reality. We're drawing the edge of blocks of colour. We're not drawing literal black lines from our reference. They don't exist. There's shadows which look like dark lines, but if you got close to them, they'd be blocks of colour again. So don't think of anything in your art as really being a bold line. And then suddenly allow that line to just wander and find approximately the right shapes. You might even have a bit of fun doing this, just purposefully putting in silly mistakes. No, you don't have to do this for all of your drawing, but it might free you up. If you just find a few mistakes which you actually put in on purpose and you were able to cope with it, you might find a lot of simple, easy learning from it, let's say. And then trees can feel different from the church. They can move and be very natural and wobbly and wibbly. And yes, I'm exaggerating a little bit here for the illustrative purposes of this video. But nonetheless, hopefully you can see the difference that can suddenly evolve just through allowing that line to wobble around. Maybe the foreground then can be a bit bolder. That adds depth. Instead of this very flat image, suddenly our wobbly line has a lot of depth. And we can add little details, little suggestions of things in the foreground without it being obvious when we didn't know what was going on. It's also much quicker. This whole drawing process would take so much less time with a quick and wobbly line. And no, this doesn't yet feel finished, but that wobbly line is our basis. And what we can do is now just solidify where things are working well, just a little bit. We don't want it to be like this. Our solid line's still going to have a bit of wobble, going to be a bit incomplete. But it means that we can now hatch, and the hatching actually feels different from everything else. It doesn't feel like the same thing again, and it doesn't become too busy. We can even add blocks of dark to really create contrast. And in no time, using a wobbly line as a basis, we'll discover even those mistakes kind of they fade away. They become a bit of a textural detail rather than an obvious mistake like whatever's going on up there. So if I could get you to do one thing, not necessarily for the rest of your life, but just as an experiment to see if it frees up your line making, to see if it gives you a bit more fun in your sketching, then it would be this: loosening up your line. Allow it to wander around the page and just see how much more interesting your art becomes in no time at all. From these loose, wandering, wobbly lines, we can add a little bit more certainty, some contrast, some textures. But because our first line is not bold, we've got flexibility, we've got a lack of busyness on the page, and we can really build things up over a much longer period of time if we want, or we can stick with that initial fun, quirky contour drawing, which was also loose, light and fun. Of course, if you follow me at all, you'll know that my ultimate loosening up technique is the idea of doing a continuous line drawing. And whether that's a person, whether it's a landscape, I'm going to make loads of mistakes. The line is going to wobble. It's not going to be real, but it's going to be fun. It's going to be characterful. It's going to be full of texture. And hopefully, even again, doing this really simple little line drawing, you start to get the idea that this is a dog, maybe, on the right, and a Toby on the left. And we can then expand this with some more certainty in a couple of lines, adding in a little detail here and there, and using our characterful lines. Even though this is a quick and silly sketch, we end up with something way more interesting than if everything was a big, bold line. And yes, Betty, my dog, got a little bit evil in this. But again, bit of character, bit of fun, and it all starts with just having those loose lines. If you enjoy this and my YouTube videos, then you'll certainly enjoy my free course, which is linked in the description below. If you want to find out more, you can find it there. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Let me know what you think of this one in the comments as well.